A lot of veterans weaken their VA disability claim before they ever file it, not because their condition isn't real, not because they didn't serve, but because they're trying to prove something the VA may already presume if they meet the criteria. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what a presumptive condition is, how to check whether your service location, dates, or circumstances qualify you for one, and what that means for your claim. No jargon, no hype, just a clear map. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have all the answers. What I will tell you is this: the VA system is designed in a way that most veterans never fully understand. And a lot of guys either give up trying to connect their condition to their service, or they spend money on a Nexus letter they may not have needed in the first place. Because there's a whole category of claims where the VA has already presumed the connection for you. The Nexus question is already answered. You just have to show you meet the criteria. That's what we're covering today. Here's why this matters right now. The PACT Act, signed into law in 2022, significantly expanded the list of presumptive conditions. Many veterans who were previously denied may now have a new path. Veterans who never filed because they thought they couldn't prove the connection may actually qualify under a presumptive. But a lot of those veterans still don't know it. And if that's you, sitting on a condition that qualifies, waiting for someone to connect the dots, you may be leaving years of back pay on the table. The earlier you file, the earlier your effective date. This isn't something to put off. Let's talk about where most veterans get stuck. When you file a standard VA disability claim, there are three things you generally need to establish. One, you have a current diagnosed condition. Two, something happened during your service. Three, there's a medical connection between the two. That connection is called the nexus, and the nexus is where claims go to die. Why? Because getting a private doctor to write a nexus letter costs money, sometimes a lot of it, and VAC and P examiners, the doctors who evaluate your claim, are inconsistent. You might get someone who actually reads your file, or you might get someone who spends 8 minutes with you and checks boxes. Most veterans don't know they can push back on that, so they accept a denial, or they never file at all because they think, I can't prove it came from the military. Here's the mistake: they're applying the Nexus standard to a claim that doesn't require one. That's the whole point of presumptive service connection. The VA has already decided in advance that certain conditions are presumed to be connected to service when a veteran meets specific criteria. You don't have to prove how it happened. You don't have to prove when. You have to show you meet the qualifying criteria, get a current diagnosis, and document your service. The VA presumes the nexus. That part is done. But here's where veterans get tripped up. There are different types of presumptives, and a lot of guys lump them together or don't know which category applies to them. So let's sort that out. There are three buckets of presumptive service connection you need to know. Bucket 1, location-based presumptives. Where you served may determine eligibility. Bucket 2, time period and exposure-based presumptives. When you served and what you may have been exposed to can determine eligibility. Bucket 3, condition-based presumptives. What you have, regardless of where or when in some cases, may determine eligibility. We're going to walk through each one. For each bucket, I'll tell you what it covers, why it works, and what most people miss that still gets them denied, even when they qualify. Bucket 1, location-based presumptives. The most well-known example is Agent Orange. If you served in Vietnam on the Korean DMZ during a specific time window or in certain other designated locations, and you have one of the conditions on the VA's Agent Orange presumptive list, the VA presumes your condition is service-connected. You do not need a Nexus letter to prove the connection. What falls on that list? Ischemic heart disease, Parkinson's disease, type 2 diabetes, several cancers. It's a long list, and it gets updated. I'd encourage you to pull the current list directly from va.gov because it's worth reading carefully. Here's why it works. Congress and the VA acknowledged that herbicide exposure in qualifying locations caused these conditions, even without individual proof for any one veteran. If you were there, the exposure is presumed. Here's what most people miss. The location criteria are more specific than they sound. I was in Southeast Asia is not enough on its own. You need documented service in a qualifying location. Blue Water Navy veterans, those who served offshore, had to fight for years before they were included. They were finally covered under the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Act, but you still have to show your ship operated in qualifying waters. Documentation matters. Don't skip that step. Bucket 2, time period and exposure-based presumptives. This is where the PACT Act significantly changed things. Under the PACT Act, certain service locations, time periods, exposures, and conditions may qualify a veteran for presumptive coverage related to burn pits and toxic airborne hazards. This is not a blanket rule that applies to every veteran who deployed after a certain date. Specific qualifying criteria apply, including where you served, what you may have been exposed to, and what condition you're claiming. The conditions covered include a range of respiratory cancers, head and neck cancers, and other conditions tied to airborne hazards. That list is also being updated as the VA continues to implement the law. Here's why it works. The VA acknowledged that burn pit and toxic exposure during certain deployments caused real harm. Rather than requiring every veteran to independently prove the connection, they tied presumptive eligibility to qualifying service circumstances. Here's what most people miss. Your deployment has to be documented in your service records. If your DD 214 doesn't reflect the right theater of service or dates, you may need to request additional records through the National Personnel Records Center. Do not assume your file is complete. Pull it, read it, verify what's in there. Bucket 3, condition-based presumptives. These are conditions the VA presumes are connected to service based on the nature of the condition itself, sometimes regardless of where you served. The clearest example is the 1-year presumptive rule for chronic disabilities. If you separate from service and within 12 months you're diagnosed with a condition on the VA's chronic disease list, things like arthritis, hypertension, or diabetes, the VA presumes service connection, provided the condition is manifest to a compensable degree. That means it has to be serious enough to qualify for at least a 10% rating under VA rules. There are also specific presumptives for former prisoners of war, covering conditions tied to malnutrition, trauma, and confinement. And the Namer framework applies to certain Agent Orange conditions under separate legal authority. Here's what most people miss: the 12-month window. Veterans wait. They think, I'll file when it gets worse. But if you're outside that window, you lose the presumption, and now you need a nexus. File early, even if your rating starts low. You can always increase it later. Okay, quick pause. So far, you know the 3 buckets: location, time period, and exposure. Condition. You know the major examples inside each one, and you know the common mistakes that cost veterans their claims, even when they qualify. Now let's talk about what actually determines whether a presumptive claim gets approved, because this is where a lot of veterans still get stuck, even after they know they qualify. Here's the thing: most videos about VA claims don't cover. Presumptive service connection does not mean automatic approval. It means the VA presumes the nexus for you, the connection between your service and your condition. That is one part of the claim. The rest of the claim still has to be there. You still need a current confirmed diagnosis, you still need to document your qualifying service, and you still need evidence showing the severity of your condition so the VA can rate it correctly. Veterans get denied on presumptive claims regularly because they file based on symptoms, not a formal diagnosis. The VA cannot grant service connection for something that hasn't been officially diagnosed. If a doctor has said it might be, or it looks like, push for a confirmed diagnosis in writing. That document is the foundation everything else sits on. Second thing, support your location or service circumstances with documentation. Don't assume the VA will find every record for you. Make it easy for them to verify where you served. Bring your DD 214, any deployment orders, unit records if you have them. A buddy statement from someone who served alongside you in the same location isn't required, but it removes doubt. The presumptive covers the nexus. You cover everything else. That's the deal. Before I close out, I want to take a step back because this is the 5th and final episode in the Over 40 Veteran Gap Strategy series. We started by talking about how to prove service connection years, sometimes decades, after you separated. Then we covered the PACT Act and what it means for veterans with thin records. We talked about medical gaps and how to handle a claim when the treatment history just isn't there. We talked about how toughing it out can actually hurt your record and why the instinct that got you through service can work against you in a claim. And we're closing here with presumptives, because sometimes the smartest move isn't figuring out how to prove the connection. It's knowing when the VA has already presumed it for you. That's what this whole series has been about. Not tricks, not shortcuts, just clarity. understanding how the system actually works so you stop leaving things on the table, here's where I want to leave you. Qualifying under a presumptive doesn't mean the claim is automatic. It means you've cleared one of the hardest hurdles. You still have to file, you still need the diagnosis, and your service records still have to tell the right story. The veterans who get stuck aren't the ones who don't qualify. They're the ones who don't know they do or who file without understanding what the VA is actually looking at. So before you file, before you refile, or before you assume the VA got it right the first time, take your decision letter and run it through my free VA Letter Translator at veteranclaimsmadeeasy.com/VA-letter-translator. It will help you understand what the VA granted, what they denied, what evidence they looked at, and what may be missing from your record. My goal is never to mislead, only to empower you with accurate, honest, and actionable information. If this series helped you, share it with a veteran who needs it. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper on this stuff. And if you've been sitting on a claim you haven't filed yet, today's a good day to start. Clarity before you file. Semper Fidelis and God bless.